By this point, we've talked a lot about what sort of processes go into a loan, how much money goes in, what sort of rates we're talking about, how you should budget around one, thinking about what sort of loans you need for various situations. But let's say you actually do need one. You need to get a car, you need to get a house, you just need a credit card for regular expenses. So you put together a proposal, you come with your hat in your hand and your best set of puppy dog eyes over to the bank, and you find the loan officer. Maybe if you don't know a good bank, you go and find your rich friend and you say to them, hey, if you let me borrow this money for some amount of time, I promise to pay you back with interest. And at that point, it would be their job, the loan officer or your friend, to determine whether or not to trust you. Maybe they'd go around and they'd ask your friends, they'd ask the local shops if you're any good. And, depending on when this was done, they might have even asked a credit reporting agency like Equifax, which has been around since 1899. So it's been there for a little while. They could go out there and try and beat the streets to get a good sense of whether or not you're trustworthy, but ultimately it would be their decision. And I'm not going to cast judgment on their ability to make fair decisions with finances, but we should understand here, we should be aware of a couple more facts that subtly enter the equation. That studies have shown people are more inclined to be trusting and friendly towards complete strangers that happen to look more like them as compared to others. And for that matter, people in the financial world, people in banking, the sort of places where they'd be able to give a loan, well, they've been predominantly, both throughout history and still to this day, white. And a lot of them are also men. So put that information in there, along with how these decisions are made and the history in America of redlining policies, that is, policies with biases against people of color, people who are not white, and people who are not heteronormative. And what you end up with is a situation where, for such people, it's a lot harder to get a loan at the terms that they want, or really even get a loan at all. So, with these ideas in mind, wanting to have a fair and equitable system to be able to track how trustworthy someone is, in terms of their money anyway, should make sense. It should seem like a thing that a reasonable person would want. And in a great piece of irony and naming, this system would be designed in 1959 by Bill Fair with the help of the less interestingly named Earl Isaac in the formation of Fair, Isaac and Company, where by 1989 they would introduce the FICO credit score, which is the main system that we still use to this day for determining how good someone's credit is, where the FICO score has a semi-secret formula. It has never been released entirely to the public, although bits and pieces have leaked out over time, where the main things that go into it are a person's payment history, their debt burden, the length of time that they've been a borrower, and the types of credit they use, along with recent searches for credit, where searches for credit are things like if you apply for a credit card, they'll check your credit scores. And it's very easy to get access to credit scores through certain online services.
No, we can't get a loan for a respectable home just because my girl defaulted on some old credit card. If we'd gone to freecreditreport.com, I'd be a happy bachelor with a dog and a yard.
And different places will give you different ranges for what's considered a good credit score or bad credit score, but generally they follow something like 720 to 850 represents someone who's very good to excellent, and you'll get the best interest rates that you possibly can, where 650 to 719, that's all right. You're probably not going to get the very best rates, but you'll usually get accepted. Then you go 630 to 649, which is where a lot of college students will fall, which is okay. it'll be a little bit harder to get loans, and the loans you get will probably have worse interest. And then below that, in the ranges from 630 to 629 and 579 down to 300, these are mediocre and just outright bad scores, where your options are going to be limited to the very worst of the potential loans that you could ask for. So is it ideal to reduce the entirety of your fiscal character down to a faceless number that you don't fully know or understand and probably never will? Obviously not. And in particular, some evidence argues that the credit score formula discriminates based on race and class, despite the fact that its existence is kind of an effort to the contrary. Moreover, regardless of what the score for a person is, a lot of people are still beholden to the whims of a loan officer. And loan officers still do make some of those decisions based on personal criteria. And, well, sometimes it doesn't really matter how good a person's credit score is when it comes to making that kind of decision, as banks, borrowers, and everyone else got in trouble in 2008.
A's, 0. B's, 0. Double B's, 0. Triple B's, 0. And then that happens.
What is that?
That's America's housing market.
Because loan officers were giving subprime loans to people who seemed, or at least based on their credit score, to have good credit, where it also puts people like you, that is, this system puts people like you in a bad position, because most college students either have mediocre credit or none at all, which means that when you guys need to do things that ask for credit scores, things like applying for cards or being able to rent an apartment, your options get a lot more limited. And you can very easily get locked into situations where you have to take bad offers with high payments, high fees, high interest rates, low balances, and potentially lock yourself into a vicious cycle of bad debt. Where the best thing that I would recommend for a young person to do is, honestly, to try and find a family member who will co-sign with you on a loan on a credit card who has good credit, because that will open doors for you. Having their name on there will help your credit score. If you can't, even try and co-sign on a loan that you know they're going to pay off. Where actually, as of 2009, Americans under 21 who don't make an independent income have to have a co-signer if they want to get a credit card. But I also recognize that that's not really an option for a lot of people, that whether or not you're able to do something like that has nothing to do with you. A lot of fiscal matters really have nothing to do with how much time you put in, because, well, no amount of time in the classroom or working a retail job is going to change how wealthy your parents are and how willing to be generous they are when it comes to co-signing on loans. And that's to say nothing of things like racial and sexual identity that have absolutely no ability to change at all, but can still have an effect on whether or not you get what you need here. That a lot of these fiscal matters, as much as people like to say it all comes down to hard work and time put in, a lot of it's blind luck. You know? Jeff Bezos is the richest man in history by some estimations, but if you could get in a time machine and tell a slave working on the pyramids that Jeff Bezos was working harder than them, for one, they'd ask you what the hell a Jeff Bezos is. But once you explain the situation, they'd then be a little bit annoyed that you told them a guy who got the government to pay him to go to space for fun works harder than they do. A lot of these things just come down to luck. That in Bezos' case, for example, he happened to be born in a time before the dot-com bubble and had family working in engineering to help build his skills and develop his interests that just about everyone else in history hasn't or didn't have. However, FICO scores, they're less than 40 years old, and hopefully in time they're going to develop into something that is more equitable, more fair, more reasonable in all of these ways that we hope that it could have been. Where this is actually a good segue to something I want to talk about a little bit more generally about this class as a whole. That I put a lot of extra time in here in the notes and in these videos for stuff that I'm not going to ask you to compute. I'm not going to ask you to, like, say on a test that Bill Fair invented credit scores, or to talk about the Charge-a-Plate as a proto-credit card. But I think that including these extra details, for one, makes the stuff a little bit more interesting and fun. At the very least, it makes it more fun and interesting for me to make these things, and hopefully that shines through, and even if it doesn't, factoids are sometimes more exciting than numbers. Even as a mathematician, I have to understand that. But even more so, I don't want to give the impression here that these formulas, these figures, these constructions, things like credit cards and credit scores and loans as we understand them and annuities and all that stuff, that they sprang into the world perfectly formed, ready to go, and never changing because they were right exactly as they were and nothing had to adjust. When the truth is, as we've seen, very little of what happens in this class, very little of the things that we have in this class, haven't changed a lot in getting here, in getting to the point that we have them today.
George Bernard Shaw, speaking as an Irishman, summed up an approach to life. Other people, he said, see things and say why. But I dream things that never were, and I say why not.
Or to think in another way, as in the scene from the first Men in Black movie.
1,500 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was the center of the universe. 500 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was flat. And 15 minutes ago, you knew that people were alone on this planet.
Imagine what you'll know tomorrow.
The point here is that our understanding of the world will change in time. And hopefully in time, it changes for the better. We probably won't be there to see it. Anyway, it's a lot of talk here. Good luck preparing for the exam on this section. If you have any questions, you're welcome to get in contact with me. Otherwise, have a good rest of your week, and we'll pick this stuff up again to move into Chapter 9, where we'll be talking about measurements.